afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to BASF at K 2025. Welcome back aboard our plastics journey. We have a fantastic panel for you. We're going to talk about the question how to go from waste to value. I'm not going to do this all on my own, but with a panel of experts here. So I'm really happy to introduce to you Mintu Bergendahl. She works for the Global Impact Coalition. Then we have Mike Jefferson, Managing Director of EPRO. Wolf Karas, he's a packaging and recycling expert at EKO-PUNKT. And my hero, Jens Hambrecht. Hi. So good to have you all here. Mike, we're going to start with you. Maybe you can unpack a little what EPRO does, what EPRO is, and then we're going to look at EPR. Yeah?
Okay, well, EPRO very briefly is a circular plastics organization and association. And it's made up of producer responsibility organizations, a lot in Europe, including in this area, so the EKO-PUNKT, RIC, and ARA, for example. Mm-hmm. Also material collection organizations, such as Plastratur in Norway and Coripla in Italy, and also technical plastics associations. Okay. And in terms of what EPR is...
in the simplest terms possible.
In the simplest terms possible, EPR is a concept. Yeah.
Okay.
And the concept is that the producers of a certain product, after they've placed their products on the market, they're responsible for them at the end of their life. And that normally means the collection for recycling.
Is there also some kind of common misconceptions about what EPR is and what it's not?
Well, I don't know if it's a misconception, but in terms of financing is normally the one that people talk about. Okay. EPR is about producers giving money. You know, they write the checks. Okay. But actually the most important aspect of EPR, I'd suggest, is not just the financial side, but is also the coordination side. So that's what creates the circularity, yeah? Because the EPR system, the PROs normally are in contact with the producers in terms of design for recycling. They're in touch with the municipalities if it's household waste. They're arranging for the sorting. They're arranging for the recycling. They're responsible for strategic aspects in terms of R&D and communications. So actually, I think an important point to stress is it's not just about writing a check. It's really about sitting in the middle of the circular economy and helping to coordinate and keep everything balanced, because that's important. I mean, as a simple example, there's no point recycling a product to make a pellet if there's no demand for that pellet. No. You know, you need to think of the full circle when you're designing your system.
Okay. Wolf, in that whole system, where does EKO-PUNKT sit? Locally, but also from a perspective. Yeah.
Locally, we're in Cologne.
Okay.
No, EKO-PUNKT is a packaging recycler. We do the EPR responsibility for our customers, and we do the recycling for them. So we got paid for collecting, sorting, recycling, and later on making the remarks on the government that everything is okay.
Okay.
Best flow.
For what applications?
Just packaging.
Just packaging, okay. How would you currently rate the collaboration between the players in this field?
Well, we have in Germany a very special situation because we don't have one system or one system provider per EPR. We have 10. Okay. So 10 companies are fighting about market shares in the recycling of packaging waste. And of course, this guides to low costs, but no money at all, because everybody wants to spend as less money as possible. And so it's difficult to have a good relation between the EPR, the producers, the recyclers, the community, and so on, because the money is not enough there.
Okay.
But when the producers understand that we have a benefit, for example, like the PBWR says you must have recycled plastic content, then they understand that it's good to spend money for the recyclers to make a better sorting, a better collection, and so on, to increase the quality, increase the capacity, of course, whatever is collected, and then earn a kind of benefit. But the benefit is not enough to finance all the system.
So that would be the way to advance the whole system a little.
Would be fine, yes. Okay. Wishful thinking.
Okay, wishful thinking. Jens, let's leave Germany for a moment, zoom out and take a look at the world. Are there certain markets, certain geographies that do a better job than others, and what can they learn from each other?
So I think one really amazing example is the Philippines, because what it has in common with many markets in Southeast Asia is a really very significant challenge with unmanaged plastic waste. But what have the policymakers done there over the past month? They've been having a successful scheme for plastic credits where individual local projects had been funded to collect plastic waste. And what they did then is to take these plastic credit schemes and to grow them into a nationwide extended producer responsibility scheme for packaging. And in doing so, they draw on all the transparency that they already have from plastic credits, where the people who got the money had to document digitally where all the plastic waste went to that they collected. So that's, I think, the transition that can really work to go from plastic credits to an EPR system in emerging markets.
Is this also considering and looking at specifically at new waste streams?
Yes. So this is, when it comes to new waste streams, we need EPR essentially all over the world. Take mattresses, for example. There is almost no country except Belgium and a few other countries, some regions in the US, where mattresses are collected and then prepared for recycling. So especially for these special plastic waste streams, there's a really need to get financing running.
Question to the three of you before we take a look more at the automotive world. What would be the most important levers in order to unlock new fields? Mike, maybe you want to start.
Well, I think for new fields, for EPR, and there are a lot of possibilities, as Jens says. I think the first thing to say is learn from what's been done before, because in some fields, such as packaging, it's been going on for more than 30 years. Some things done right, some things done wrong. So I'd say look to what's gone before. In terms of the most important lever, I would say a key thing to think about when you're designing a system is strategic growth and investment. So quite often what you find with legislation around EPR is you have these big bang targets that come in 2025 and 2030 and 2035. But I think what industry needs to meet those targets is the investment conditions, first of all, and also gradual growth. It's much easier to grow a little bit each year than kind of leave it 5 years and then try and do a massive jump in the last year. So I think things like interim targets are a very good lever when thinking about how to, for example, plan your path forward and kind of strategic development plans between national governments and PROs, for example.
Wolf, stable investment conditions, frameworks, is that something that you would also support as an important lever?
Yes, of course, because there are many constructions that cannot be recycled at the moment. Composite, for example. And so we need a de-inking, defragmentation, delabeling, and so on, new technologies, perhaps even solvents or whatever, to be in addition to the already existing mechanical recycling flows. Also the sorting, we sort in the same way almost like we did when we started the packaging recycling. Perhaps it gives sense to make a in-between solution, to get rigid plastics together and sort them very deeply in a special place. Okay. Not only for color, but also for MFI and whatever. So we have to think about everything new, even if you have a running system with legislation and okay performance at all. But it's not the best way you can do. Also the question, why do we not use the consumer? He gets everything, pays nothing, and we go to the house and say, give us our waste. He has also benefit from packaging. He can invest something. For example, with WEEE, he has to do something. He has to put his electric devices, put into a collecting system. With batteries, the same. Perhaps also with packaging? No.
Jens, how do you see the role of the consumer in this?
So the consumer really makes an impact with his choice. And I want to give one example. Consumers buying single-use plastic bags. In Ireland, there is a fee in place for single-use plastic bags. And yes, this did help to bring down the total consumption of these single-use plastic bags. But what happens with a levy is the money goes somewhere in government. Maybe it's used for building roads, maybe it's used for other good purposes, but the money doesn't end up where we need it, because the recyclers, they're the ones who need the funding to run their recycling operations. So if I had one wish, it would be to really allocate EPR fees much more ambitiously based on the application. So if as a consumer I need to pay for a single-use plastic bag, then that's good. It makes me use these bags less. But the money, that's my point, should go to the recycler and not to somewhere in the tax system.
Yeah, important point. See you nodding.
Yeah, I mean, I agree fully. I mean, if I could just jump in, I think that's a key difference between EPR and other forms of funding, such as taxes. Yeah, in EPR, the producers are responsible not just for the money, but actually for making it happen, working with their PRO partners. So, I mean, that's a very important point, that somehow the money that's pushed into the system is actually used to solve the problem which it's addressing.
Mintu, it's about time that we get you into the conversation, because maybe you can first of all describe what the Global Impact Coalition does,
Sure.
And then let's take a deeper look at the automotive project that you just did.
Exactly. So Global Impact Coalition, a chemical industry coalition. We have 10 different members, including BASF, all the others that you can find here, LG Chem, SABIC, BASF, all the booths you can find.
Hall 6.
Exactly. And we work on sustainable projects for the industry, whether it's plastics or
Okay.
specific.
And you just ran a specific, let's say, pilot project which was looking at automotive plastics, which is kind of the end boss of recycling. Also.
Exactly, not the easiest one to recycle.
Exactly, yeah.
So we basically started this year a pilot from dismantling to shredding and sorting, and then eventually to recycling and hopefully to use, to understand if it's even feasible to get the plastics out of end-of-life vehicles.
Is it?
It's difficult,
Yeah.
but it's doable. But we need all of the parties to get there. And basically, we took 100 cars, 35 different parts were dismantled. We got 50% out of the volume. So 150, 200 is there's a lot of potential in the car. But it gets difficult when we move forward to shredding, sorting. These are multi-material parts. They have paint, coatings, metals. That makes it difficult in the process.
So from your perspective, how would an EPR for a field like this ideally look like?
So first of all, so there is end-of-life vehicle regulation coming, but it's still uncertain, and that's not good for the business case. So now the industry needs security to build the technologies and scale it forward, to invest, which is not there at the moment.
Do we have that in other fields? A clearer path forward, Jens?
So, I mean, we have historically packaging. That was the first industry where EPR was set up. And I think the textiles is now coming up, but from my perspective, Wolf packaging is way ahead. Or what do you think?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I'm preparing for these talks, I always learn a lot about abbreviations. So we had ELVR already, SUPD is also another one I learned, PPWR, of course, we have to mention. How do all these different schemes make it difficult for companies, for consumers to really see that there's a clear path? And how binding, how much force do they have, actually, traction, Mike?
Well, EPR normally is in fields where there's a need for some sort of intervention, because if everything worked, the finances worked without the legislation, then the legislation doesn't need to be put in place, it just works, yeah? And even in things like packaging, you can think of examples where that happens. Some types of commercial and industrial packaging, for example, just pay for themselves. But in the most cases, it's legislation that's needed, and it's vital, absolutely vital. If it's set correctly, it will influence the investment decisions that are taken to get the right mix of technologies on the market. It will provide the right economic incentives for people to do the right thing and to drive investment and to drive the action which is required. So in this field, legislation is behind everything. The point what I would make, though, is that, for example, the PPWR, the packaging waste regulation that you mentioned, almost to a degree is the start of it if we're talking about EPR. Actually, EPR systems, PROs, don't have a lot of responsibility directly under the PPWR. You won't find many places where it says the PRO will do this. But the PRO, of course, will be central to it. Everyone will turn to the PRO to say, we need support, we need you to play a role here, whether or not that's collection, sorting, recycling, recycled content design for recycling. So it's critical, legislation, but it also means it's very, very powerful. So we see in the PPWR, for example, that there's a lot of secondary legislation that's not yet in place. That's inevitable, but it is in some instances hindering investments that are required because of that uncertainty. And so it's very powerful, but it can also delay if it doesn't come quick enough.
But isn't this also to some extent part of the normal political process, of the decision-making process, that there is more coming up then?
That's true, and it's an iterative process. Also, for example, what we are learning, it's quite new learnings through the pilot. So we need to also help the politicians on what is possible for a target, for example.
If you take a look at the project and you mentioned the learnings, what were the most important learnings or the biggest surprises, positive or negative?
Okay, first of all, it's still very early to even try to get plastics out of automotive. So mainly metals are being taken today. And it's very scattered, and we are now focusing only in Europe, but then take the whole world. It's small players across, so it's not. The economics is not the best at the moment. There's a lot. So automotives are probably the most complex in terms of plastics design. So there's a lot of design improvements that we can do to help to the parts get through the whole process and recycling.
Yeah.
But we do have technologies available, so it's not.
There's hope.
There's hope.
Why is there hope? Yeah.
Well, because what we're learning is that actually it's the waste stream that you have that really determines which recycling technology fits best. So we have clean and sorted waste streams, and for these mechanical recycling works best. Then we have waste streams that are also sorted, but maybe they've been recycled a number of times, and then you get to a point where maybe a chemical recycling approach, such as depolymerization, works best. And finally, when we talk about really the dirtiest and most mixed waste streams, there's gasification possible, and we've now shown that this gasification of shredder residues, that this really works. So we took shredder residues from cars and gasified these in Vienna alongside biomass waste, and out of this we produced new plastic for a steering wheel that you can look at our booth here. So it's becoming tangible, Richard, that we can also turn this shredder residue into value.
Yeah, and apparently this was something that I would say the world has been waiting for, because that story generated quite some attention out there, right?
There was half a page on this project in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, and I'm really happy to see that we're getting to this discussion of what can we do to recycle as much plastic waste as possible. So it's not about mechanical or chemical recycling, it's about looking at the waste stream and, for example, for shredder residues, to sort out whatever we can sort out for mechanical recycling and then let the rest go into gasification. That's the concept, to get it together.
I mean, K is not only the stage for these new ecosystems and partnerships along the value chain that we need in order to become circular, but it's also, of course, a big global innovation show. How much innovation, let's also say technical innovation, is involved in these? In this progress?
In the process, well, a huge amount, and I think there's a big change coming. I mean, the packaging waste regulation, if we're looking at that, but also if we're looking at end-of-life vehicles, it's all about circularity back into the same sector. So PPWR is pushing packaging back into packaging, and end-of-life vehicles back into end-of-life vehicles, and that means quality. And so in terms of innovation, there's a huge amount happening at the moment. Again, this is where legislation has a role to play in terms of providing those investment conditions. And to be honest, at the moment, the plastic recycling sector is going through a really difficult time. So we probably need some additional drivers and actions taken. But yeah, I mean, quality is probably the biggest change we'll see in the next 10 years in terms of the polymer being made. Now, that could be at one end, it could be chemical recycling, it could be dissolution, but also mechanical recycling as well. The innovations there coming through are creating the possibility to get really quite high quality polymer, and that's important because gone are the days where you could just make any old quality and there will always be someone that will take it. Someone will find something to do with it. We're recycling too much too much, which is good. We're recycling a lot now, so we need to really start thinking about the end market pull and those end market drivers. And I shouldn't forget to mention sorting as well. It's not just about recycling technologies, of which we have a lot, delamination, extraction, cleaning with solvents, but also in the sorting as well as artificial intelligence. There's digital watermarking, I could go on, combination of different optical sorting. So I think all of these things are needed, and all of these things will create a big change in the sector in the next 10 years.
Yeah, and we have a number of interesting examples also here at the BASF booth, also on sorting, for example. Jens, maybe more from a chemical perspective, where do you see the biggest field for innovation?
So it starts actually with the design of our products, because let's take one example, a polyurethane. A polyurethane, as you know, is a foam and it's interlinked. So usually you can't recycle this mechanically. But what our scientists ask themselves, what can we do to make this mechanically recyclable? And they redesigned soft polyurethane foam in such a way that now the soft foam that you use for seating can be mechanically recycled. We call this melt emulsification. So by thinking from the design of the process onwards about how to recycle it, there's much more we can realize for mechanical recycling.
Mm-hmm. Wolf, to what extent do you need innovation, like constant innovation, also in your field?
Yes, of course we need innovation, but I have the problem, who pays the innovation?
Okay.
And we have not a monopoly, but we have a competitive system. Nobody wants to pay the innovative processes. And when somebody is thinking about investing money in his own technology, it's not set because he may be a little bit more expensive, so the other competitors follow him. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So perhaps it's a good idea for new technology to have a monopoly, but not for the price itself. The price itself is, of course, much cheaper when you have competition.
That's an interesting pitch, Mike. What would you say to that?
Well, firstly, I recognise the challenge completely. I mean, I think in any market, whether or not there's multiple PROs or a single PRO, that kind of strategic thinking to get the investment is vitally important. In some countries, there's been a direct intervention by PROs to maybe grab hold of streams that need some sort of special focus. I'm thinking, when I'm talking here, of France, for example. In France, the material is owned by the packaging material is owned by the municipality, but there are certain streams, including household flexibles, that maybe need a little bit more strategic thinking. And in those cases, the PROs have got ownership of that material to try and create the mass that will facilitate the investments. We see it again in Belgium. In Belgium, the PRO for packaging, for household packaging, owns the material, and they've used that to create investment conditions. They've put in place 9-year contracts to build new sorting centres, to build new recycling plants, to actually kickstart the investment. And in solutions where there are, in countries where there are multiple PROs, there'll need to be different solutions. But whichever market you're in, that kind of strategic thinking and creating investment conditions is important.
I'd like to also come back to the topic of the educational effort that needs to be done in order to also make the public understand. But Jens, first of all, one more question on the market. You just mentioned to me before we went on stage that you did a LinkedIn post last week on a talk that we had here with a related subject, which generated huge traction, especially in emerging markets.
Yeah, and this is really the reality. So, for example, for the post to our session today, we got 70,000 LinkedIn users reading that this discussion takes place, asking questions, giving suggestions. I think this really shows just how urgently there is a need for EPR systems in emerging markets. Mm-hmm. And free learnings we have for these systems to really work. One is we need the money that goes to the recycler to be sufficient. Second, we need the money to come on an ongoing basis so that the wages can be paid at the end of each month. And the third learning that we have is the funding needs to be transparent. So this is the one thing we need to make sure with EPR systems, that the transparency is always given.
Okay. As I said, I'd like to come to the topic of the educational or making the public also understand, making end consumers understand. How do you see also your role in that? Is that part of your role? And if not, is somebody doing it?
It's a big part of the role.
Yeah.
It's actually very important because it's so many learnings, and it requires, as you say, so many parties. So EPR, no one company can do it alone. And we learn from all the parties from the value chain step. For example, automotive, from dismantlers, shredders, sorters, they all have very specific problems that are linked to either design or other things. So sharing, that's also the aim. For example, the pilot that we're planning towards the end of the year.
Yeah, this is also something I clearly recognize with the talks this year at K. We have much more people on stage, so there seems to be a much clearer understanding of how many players have to be involved in the value chain to make it happen.
Yeah, it's completely, like I said at the beginning, it's a whole circular economy, it's a whole value chain that needs to be involved. You know, it's that design for recycling impacts not just on the recycling, but also on the sorting, for example. So yeah, it's complete. And to your point in terms of communication, I mean, that's vitally important. That's something else that needs to be funded, I think, in all markets through whichever mechanism. We can talk about household communication. Probably everyone on this stage gets lots of questions if they go for a meal somewhere about how do you do this, where should I be putting that, and everything else. But it's also about commercial and industrial packaging as well. I mean, there are producer responsibility organizations there that are able to take waste, they do the compositional analysis, they look at the data, they see if one particular supplier is getting as much plastic as, for example, might be typical for that type of business from other data that they have. And all of that analysis and communication, whether or not it's an industrial user or a household consumer, is important. That's how the system gets optimized, yeah.
And building on what Mike said, I think when it comes to the design of such EPR systems, we really need to design it as one value chain together. And I'm not sure if, as a chemical industry, we've really been involved here and committed resources, manpower to design these systems as it's necessary when it all started. Because we're learning now, you asked a question about innovation. So if we talk about how can we design an extended producer responsibility system to incentivize innovation, then that's a topic we need to solve as value chain together. Because in the chemical industry, we know which innovations we're working on, the mechanical recyclers know the innovations they are tackling, and we need to get these ideas into one room to then come up with an EPR system that really makes the entire value chain circular.
But don't forget, it's done by brutal force, by the packaging. Just brutal force, not about, oh, let's design better way.
Let's get together,
do it or vanish.
Yeah.
So it sounds hard, but it was perhaps a good idea to make it the brutal way.
Yeah, sometimes that's necessary, absolutely. Yeah. Now I'd like to take a look ahead, into the future. You know that the K is happening every 3 years, and this is normally my closing question here. If we meet again in 3 years, or choose 6 or 9, whenever what are we going to talk about? 2028.
Okay, more scale, but in 2028 there's secure regulation in place, not changing all the time. And we already have businesses that are viable economically, so it's more, okay, how do we invent it even and scale it? But we have the baseline.
Okay, that would be your wish.
That would be my
definitely.
We'll make.
What would be your wish for 28?
I wish you'd have given me a little bit longer than 3 years, but I'll try and answer the question.
You can come back in 2031?
Well, maybe if we go into that. I mean, I think, to answer your question, in 3 years we should have more visibility on some of the important secondary legislation and some of the other legislation that's been developed. And so that will start to kickstart, and we'll start to see changes on the ground in terms of investments, but also changes within, for example, sorting centres and the commercial industrial stream supply chain. I think if you give me a little bit longer, maybe 6, even 9 years, then that's where we'll start to really see, I think, the changes on the ground. Because if we look across Europe and globally, there's a big difference between countries in terms of where they're at on their journey to get to where we ultimately need to be. And so some countries have further to go than others, but I certainly think that, maybe 6 years from now, we'll start to see the big changes on the ground.
6. Wolf, how about you?
I hope.
What's your year? What's your year first?
That in 3 years, the PPR lost its gimmick looking. Everybody's understood what they have to do, that everything wanted is reasonable. And I hope that the recyclers, the mechanical recyclers itself, get the value of recycling they have to get.
Yeah.
Because in the moment they don't get earn the money, they should be theirs. And so I hope the market changes to more interest in their products, and the circumstances should be better for them to be accepted.
Fingers crossed. And what can we do apart from keep our fingers crossed? Yeah.
So my hope and my call for action is the years going forward to really look at what can we do on a local, on a national level. Maybe we expected too much from the UN Plastics Treaty to come out, because right now there is not inside that we have a binding global agreement. But what we need for sure is that at the national level, we set up these EPR schemes that we talked about. So I think the task for us is to reach out to our national policymakers and to jointly lobby for EPR systems to be set up in our markets.
Okay. So we meet back, let's start 28, and then you can come back in 6 years also. Thank you all very much for sharing your insights. We have clearly learned what it takes in order to get this topic going. Mintu, Mike, Wolf, and Jens will still be with us for a couple of minutes, I think, here around the stage. So if you have any more questions, suggestions, ideas, they're here for you. Thank you all for your attention. Thanks for participating.
Thank you.
BASF. We create chemistry.